Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Wanderer and watched the dead stars through the main view screen. This part of space had no planets worth visiting and no resources worth mining. The galaxy's map showed this region as empty, wasteland that stretched for thousands of light years in every direction. Most species avoided coming here because there was nothing but cold space and the remains of long-dead solar systems. Jake had been exploring space for 20 years now, and he had never seen anything quite like this place. The silence here felt different somehow. Even his crew seemed quieter than usual as they moved through their daily tasks. The ship's sensors picked up nothing but empty space and the faint radiation signatures of stars that had burned out millions of years ago. Dr. Lisa Hamilton called out from her station near the back of the bridge. She was the team's expert on old alien cultures and ruins. Her job was to study anything they found that might tell them about the species that used to live in the galaxy long before humans made contact with the other civilizations 50 years ago. "Captain, I'm getting some strange readings from the scanner array," she said while looking at her display screen with a confused expression on her face. "There's something big about 30 million kilometers ahead of us. The computer says it's made of metal, but the composition doesn't match anything in our database." Jake walked over to look at her screen. The object appeared as a small dot of light against the black background of space, but the size measurements made his eyes widen. According to the sensors, this thing was huge. Bigger than any space station he had ever seen, and definitely bigger than any ship in the human fleet. "How big exactly?" Jake asked. "The computer estimates it's about 40 kilometers long and maybe 15 kilometers wide," Lisa replied. "That would make it larger than any known vessel in galactic history. Even the ancient hegemony dreadnoughts were only half that size." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. In 50 years of peaceful contact with other species, humans had learned a lot about galactic history. The oldest civilizations kept detailed records going back hundreds of thousands of years. If this object was bigger than anything in those records, then it was either very new or very, very old. "Set course for the object," Jake ordered. "Full sensor sweep as we approach, but keep our distance until we know what we're dealing with." The Wanderer changed direction and began moving toward the mysterious object. As they got closer, the sensors revealed more details that made the crew increasingly nervous. The thing was definitely artificial and appeared to be some kind of spacecraft, but it was completely dark. No energy signatures at all. No life signs. No communication signals. "It looks like a derelict," reported Lieutenant Commander Ben Rogers from the tactical station. "Whatever it is, it's been dead in space for a very long time. The hull shows impact damage from micrometeorites that would take thousands of years to accumulate." Dr. Hamilton was practically bouncing in her seat with excitement. Ancient alien artifacts were exactly the kind of thing she lived for. "Captain, we have to board that ship. This could be the archaeological find of the century. Maybe even the millennium." Jake wasn't so sure. Something about this whole situation felt wrong to him. Dead space, mysterious giant ships, and the complete absence of any records about objects this size made him nervous. But he also knew that Lisa was right. If this really was some kind of ancient vessel, then studying it could advance human understanding of galactic history by decades or even centuries. "All right," he said finally. "We'll dock with the object and send over an exploration team. But we do this carefully. Full environmental suits and constant communication with the ship. At the first sign of danger, we abort the mission." 2 hours later, Jake found himself floating through the airlocks of the alien vessel alongside Dr. Hamilton and 3 other crew members. Their suit lights cut through the darkness, revealing corridors and chambers unlike anything any of them had ever seen. The architecture was strange but somehow familiar. The proportions seemed designed for beings about the same size as humans. "The atmospheric readings show that this place once had breathable air," Lisa said over the comm system. "Oxygen-nitrogen mix very similar to Earth normal. That's impossible, though. No known species in this region of the galaxy uses that kind of atmosphere." They moved deeper into the ship, following corridors that seemed to stretch on forever. The walls were covered with symbols and writing that looked almost familiar, but not quite readable. Jake had the strangest feeling that he should be able to understand the markings, but couldn't quite make sense of them. After an hour of exploration, they found what appeared to be the ship's central command area. banks of dark screens and control. Panels filled a large circular room. At the center of the space stood something that made all of them stop and stare. It was a cylindrical chamber about 3 meters tall and made of some kind of transparent material. Inside the chamber, suspended in a greenish fluid, was the figure of a man. A human man. He appeared to be in perfect condition, as if he was simply sleeping. The chamber was connected to various machines and energy conduits that ran throughout the room. "That's impossible," Jake whispered. "Humans have only been in space for a couple hundred years. This ship is clearly ancient." Dr. Hamilton was already scanning the chamber with every instrument she had. "The stasis field is still active," she reported. "Life signs are stable. This person is alive but in some kind of suspended animation. The chamber's power source appears to be some kind of quantum battery that could theoretically function for tens of thousands of years." Jake stared at the sleeping figure. The man looked to be in his 30s with dark hair and strong features. He was wearing some kind of uniform that looked almost military, but not like anything Jake had ever seen before. Most disturbing of all, the uniform had symbols on it that looked very much like early human writing. "We need to wake him up," Lisa said. "The chamber controls appear to be functional. I think I can safely revive him." "Absolutely not," Jake replied immediately. "We don't know anything about this situation. What if there's a reason he was put in stasis? What if he's dangerous?" But even as he spoke, Jake found himself drawn to the chamber. Something about the sleeping man seemed important, familiar somehow, like a half-remembered dream that stays with you after waking. Lisa was still studying her readings. "Captain, the energy patterns from this stasis chamber are starting to change. I think our presence here might have triggered some kind of automated system. The revival process may have already started whether we want it to or not." As if her words were a prediction, the chamber began to hum with energy. Lights that had been dark for thousands of years suddenly flickered to life around the room. The green fluid in the chamber started to drain away and the man's eyes began to flutter. Jake stepped back and drew his sidearm. He didn't know what they were about to face, but 50 years of peaceful contact with aliens had taught humanity to be careful when encountering unknown situations. The chamber opened with a soft hiss, and the man inside took his first breath in. Thousands of years! His eyes opened slowly and focused on the group of humans standing before him. When he spoke, his voice was rough from disuse, but the words he said made everyone's blood run cold. "How long have I slept?" the man asked in an ancient dialect of English that was barely recognizable. "Are the others still contained?" Far across the galaxy, in places that had been forgotten by every living species, ancient machines buried deep beneath the surface of dead worlds suddenly activated for the first time in 50,000 years. Warning signals that had been silent since before recorded history began transmitting into the void. The Guardian had awakened, and the galaxy would never be the same. The man who called himself Commander Alex Stone sat in the medical bay of the UES Wanderer while Dr. Kevin Price ran every test he could think of. Stone appeared to be perfectly healthy despite having been in stasis for what the carbon dating suggested was over 50,000 years. His vital signs were normal, and his physical condition was that of a man in his early 30s. What troubled Dr. Price was not Stone's physical health, but his mental state. The man spoke in fragments of ancient languages mixed with forms of English that had not been used for thousands of years. Sometimes he would stop talking completely and stare at nothing for several minutes. When asked about his past, he would give answers that made no sense. "I remember the darkness between stars," Stone had said during one of their sessions. "We built walls to keep it out, but walls can crumble. The vigil must continue, or everything ends." Captain Jake Morrison stood outside the medical bay talking quietly with Dr. Lisa Hamilton about what they had learned so far. Lisa had been studying the ancient ship that they now knew was called the Eternal Vigil. Her findings were disturbing. The ship's computer systems are more advanced than anything we have today, Lisa explained, but they're also completely alien to any known technology in the galactic database. It's like someone took human engineering and pushed it thousands of years beyond what should be possible. "What about the star charts we found?" Jake asked. Lisa's expression grew dark. "That's the really scary part. I've identified over 200 star systems marked on those charts. Every single one of them is dead now. No planets, no asteroids, Nothing but empty space where entire solar systems used to exist. Jake felt that familiar chill run down his spine. How long ago did those systems die? Based on radiation decay patterns and gravitational signatures, I'd say about 50,000 years ago. Right around the time our friend in there was put into stasis. Back on Earth, President Helen Carter was dealing with a crisis unlike anything humanity had faced since first contact. The Galactic Hegemony Council had sent an urgent message demanding that Stone be turned over to them immediately. The tone of the message was not one of polite diplomatic request, but of barely controlled panic. The message had been delivered by Ambassador Zix of the Vorthan Empire. The Vorthans were one of the 5 founding species of the hegemony, and had never shown fear of anything in all the years humans had known them. But when Ambassador Zix spoke about Stone, there was genuine terror in his alien features. "Your species does not understand what you have awakened," the ambassador said. "The being you call Commander Stone represents a Class Omega extinction threat. Such classifications have been used only 3 times in galactic history, and in each case, entire civilizations were destroyed." President Carter had demanded more information, but the ambassador had been reluctant to provide details. Finally, he had shared a piece of information that made her blood run cold. 50,000 years ago, there was a war, Zix said quietly. A war against entities that consumed entire worlds to fuel their expansion. These beings were called the Devourers, and they came from the darkness between galaxies. The war lasted 10,000 years and cost billions of lives. "What does this have to do with Commander Stone?" Carter asked. "Because the species that finally stopped the Devourers was not us. It was not any of the great civilizations that exist today. The species that ended the war was yours. Humanity." Carter stared at the ambassador in shock. "That's impossible. 50,000 years ago, humans were barely more than primitive hunters living in caves." "Were they?" Zix replied. "Or is that simply what they chose to become afterward?" Meanwhile, aboard the Wanderer Commander, Stone was slowly beginning to remember more of his past. The memories came in fragments like pieces of a broken mirror slowly being put back together. Each memory revealed something more disturbing about humanity's hidden history. He remembered standing on the bridge of a ship, surrounded by humans who no longer looked entirely human. Their eyes held a darkness that reflected the void between stars. They had learned to fight the Devourers by becoming like them. They had learned to consume matter and energy to fuel weapons that could unmake entire solar systems. "We became monsters to fight monsters," Stone said during one of his sessions with Dr. Price. "But in the end, we realized that we had to choose between saving the galaxy and remaining human. We could not do both." Dr. Price made notes while trying to understand what Stone was telling him. "What did you choose?" "We chose to save the galaxy," Stone replied. "But the cost was everything we were. We built the Guardian ships and placed ourselves in exile. 12 ships scattered across the galaxy to watch and wait and make sure the darkness never returned." "What were you guarding against?" Dr. Price asked. Stone's expression grew grim. "Not against. We were guarding the galaxy from us. From what we had become. From what we could become again if we were ever awakened." Dr. Lisa Hamilton was working in the ship's laboratory analyzing samples from the Eternal Vigil when her computer chimed with an incoming message. The message was encrypted, with codes that should not have existed. When she managed to decode it, the contents made her hands shake. The message was from an automated system buried deep beneath the surface of Earth's Antarctic ice, a system that had just activated for the first time in 50,000 years. The message was simple but terrifying. "Guardian Unit 7 has awakened. Beginning preparation for Protocol Omega. All archived assets moving to standby status, awaiting confirmation from Command Authority." Lisa immediately contacted Captain Morrison. "Jake, you need to see this." "I think we've triggered something on Earth, something that's been waiting for 50,000 years. At the same time, similar messages were being received by monitoring stations throughout human space. Ancient systems that no one knew existed were powering up. Deep space sensors were detecting energy signatures from locations that were supposed to be empty space." Back in the medical bay, Stone suddenly stood up and walked to the window that looked out at the stars. His posture had changed. The confused, fragmented personality was gone, replaced by something that felt older and more dangerous. "They're waking up," he said quietly. "The old weapons, the old defenses. My awakening has triggered systems that were meant to stay dormant forever." Dr. Price activated his emergency comm. "Captain Morrison to Medical Bay immediately. I think our situation just became much more serious." When Jake arrived, he found Stone standing perfectly still, looking out at space. There was something different about the man now. Something that made Jake want to reach for his weapon. "Commander Stone," Jake said carefully. "Dr. Price says you're remembering more about your past." Stone turned to face him, and Jake saw that the man's eyes had changed. They were still human, but there was something else looking out from behind them. Something ancient and patient and very, very dangerous. "I remember everything now, Captain Morrison," Stone said in a voice that was calm and controlled. "I remember the war. I remember what we did to win it. And I remember why we chose to forget." "What are you talking about?" Jake asked. 50,000 years ago, humanity faced a choice," Stone explained. "We could remain human and watch the galaxy, burn, or we could become something else to save it. We chose transformation. We learned to consume worlds the way the Devourers did. We became walking weapons of mass destruction." Stone walked closer to Jake, who found himself stepping backward, without thinking about it. "The Guardian Project was our attempt at redemption," Stone continued. "We scattered the most dangerous humans throughout the galaxy in stasis chambers. We wiped our own history from existence. We chose to become a species of peaceful traders and diplomats. But we kept the weapons, we kept the knowledge, and we kept 12 Guardians watching to make sure the galaxy would never need us to remember what we really are." "And now you're awake," Jake said. Stone nodded. "And so are the weapons. My awakening has triggered automated systems throughout human space. Every human colony sits on top of ancient installations that could level continents. Every human ship carries dormant systems that could consume stars. We didn't join the galactic community as refugees, Captain. We joined as sleeping gods who chose to dream of being merely human." The communication system suddenly activated, and President Carter's voice filled the room. "Captain Morrison, I need to speak with Commander Stone immediately. We have a situation." Stone walked to the communication console and activated it. "This is Guardian Unit 7. Report status." There was a long pause before Carter replied. "Commander, we've received demands from every major power in the galaxy. They want you surrendered to them for containment or elimination. They say you represent an extinction-level threat." "They are correct," Stone replied calmly, "though not in the way they think. The threat is not what I am. The threat is what humanity will become if the galaxy forces us to remember what we used to be." Another long pause. "Commander, what are you talking about, Madam President?" Stone said quietly. "I'm talking about the fact that every human being in the galaxy carries dormant genetic modifications in their DNA, modifications that would activate if humanity ever faced extinction. Your peaceful species of traders and diplomats is a choice, not an evolution. And if that choice is taken away from us, the galaxy will remember why they used to fear the darkness between stars." Admiral Ben Rogers stood in the war room of Earth Defense Command, watching displays that showed the positions of alien fleets throughout human space. 3 days had passed since Commander Stone's awakening, and the galaxy's response had been swift and terrifying. Every major power was mobilizing their military forces and positioning them near human colonies. The Hegemony Council had delivered an ultimatum: surrender Stone for immediate containment or face military intervention to protect the galaxy from what they called the Human Resurgence Protocol. Admiral Rogers had been a military officer for 30 years, but he had never faced a situation where Earth itself was threatened by the combined might of galactic civilization. President Helen Carter entered the war room, followed by Dr. Amy Foster, who had just returned from an emergency archaeological expedition to Antarctica. Dr. Foster looked exhausted, but her eyes held the kind of excitement that came from making discoveries that changed everything. "Admiral," the president said, "Dr. Foster has found something in Antarctica that explains why the aliens are so terrified. Tell him what you discovered." Dr. Foster activated a holographic display that showed images from deep beneath the Antarctic ice. What appeared on the screen looked like a vast underground facility stretching for hundreds of kilometers in every direction. The architecture was clearly human, but far more advanced than anything in current use. "We found a preservation complex buried 3 kilometers under the ice," Dr. Foster explained. "Carbon dating puts its age at approximately 50,000 years. The facility contains detailed records of something called the Guardian Project and the war against entities called the Devourers." Admiral Rogers studied the images. "What kind of records?" "Everything," Dr. Foster replied. "Complete historical databases, technical specifications for weapons that could reshape matter at the quantum level, genetic modification protocols that could transform human beings into living weapons, and most importantly, the real reason why the Guardian ships were scattered across the galaxy." She changed the display to show a star map covered with red markers. "Each marker represents a Guardian ship positioned at strategic points throughout the galaxy. But they weren't guarding against external threats, Admiral. They were containing human artifacts and weapons left behind from the war." President Carter stepped forward. "Dr. Foster also discovered why Stone's awakening has triggered such panic. Show him the containment protocols." The display changed again, showing technical specifications that made Admiral Rogers feel cold despite the room's warmth. The documents described weapons that could consume entire star systems to fuel their operation. Devices that could transform ordinary humans into beings, capable of surviving in the vacuum of space and metabolizing stellar radiation. "According to these records," Dr. Foster said, "every human being carries dormant genetic modifications in their DNA. These modifications were added during the war to allow rapid transformation if humanity faced extinction. The Guardian ships were positioned to prevent these modifications from ever being activated." Admiral Rogers sat down heavily in his chair. "Are you telling me that every human in the galaxy is a potential weapon of mass destruction?" "Not potential, Admiral," came a voice from the door. Commander Stone entered the room accompanied by Captain Jake Morrison and Dr. Lisa Hamilton. Stone's appearance had changed over the past few days. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator, and his eyes held an awareness that seemed to take in everything at once. "Every human already is a weapon," Stone continued. "The modifications are not dormant. They are active but suppressed by psychological conditioning that has been passed down through your culture for 50,000 years. Your peaceful nature is not evolution. It is programming designed to keep you from remembering what you really are." President Carter turned to face Stone. "Commander, we need to understand our options. The alien fleets are demanding your surrender, but they've also made it clear that they consider all of humanity a potential threat. What happens if we refuse their demands?" Stone walked to the holographic display and gestured toward the star map. "If you refuse, they will attempt to destroy every human colony and facility in the galaxy. They believe this will eliminate the threat. They are incorrect." "Why?" Admiral Rogers asked. "Because the Guardian ships contain more than just weapons," Stone explained. "They contain preserved samples of human genetic material from before the modifications. They also contain detailed records of every alien species in the galaxy, including their biological and psychological weaknesses. Information gathered during 50,000 years of warfare." Dr. Hamilton stepped forward with a datapad in her hands. "We've been monitoring communications from the alien fleets. They're not just afraid of Stone. They're terrified because their own historical records contain references to humanity's role in the ancient war, records that they thought were myths until now." She activated her datapad and projected an intercepted alien communication into the room. The voice belonged to Fleet Commander Thys of the Centauri Federation. "The Silent Guardians have awakened. Recommend immediate withdrawal to minimum safe distance. If the humans activate their ancient protocols, our vessels will not survive the first engagement. The historical precedents are clear. Humanity did not merely defeat the Devourers. They became them." Stone nodded grimly. "The other species remember fragments of what happened 50,000 years ago. They remember that when the war ended, there were no more Devourers, but there were also no more humans, as they had originally existed. They remember that the species that emerged victorious was something new, something that chose to forget its own power." Captain Morrison spoke up from where he had been standing quietly. "Stone, what exactly are you suggesting we do about this situation? You have 3 choices, Captain," Stone replied. "You can surrender me to the aliens and hope they are satisfied with eliminating one Guardian. You can attempt to negotiate a peaceful resolution while alien fleets surround your colonies, or you can activate the protocols and remember what humanity was meant to become. President Carter looked around the room at the faces of her advisors. What would activating these protocols actually involve? Stone's expression became serious. It would require awakening the other 11 Guardians. It would mean accessing the weapons caches that have been hidden throughout human space for 50,000 years. And it would mean transforming every human being in the galaxy into something capable of surviving in a hostile universe without requiring planets or ships or any of the infrastructure that other species depend on. You're talking about fundamentally changing our species, Admiral Rogers said. I'm talking about returning your species to its true form, Stone corrected. The peaceful traders and diplomats that you have been for the past 50,000 years were always meant to be a temporary disguise, a way of integrating with galactic civilization while the galaxy recovered from the war. Dr. Foster activated another display showing energy readings from around the galaxy. The choice may not be ours to make. Our sensors are detecting massive energy buildups at 11 locations throughout the galaxy. The other Guardian ships are beginning to awaken whether we want them to or not. Stone examined the display with growing concern. That should not be happening. The Guardian ships were designed to remain dormant unless manually activated. What does it mean? President Carter asked. Stone was quiet for several long moments before answering. It means that something has gone wrong with the containment systems. The weapons and entities that the Guardians were meant to keep contained are beginning to break free. The galaxy may be about to face the same threats that nearly destroyed it 50,000 years ago. As if summoned by his words, the communication system activated with an emergency signal from the Deep Space Monitoring Station at Proxima Centauri. The voice of Station Commander Kate Sullivan filled the room and, she sounded terrified, Earth Control. We have a situation at Guardian Site 3. The containment field has collapsed and we're detecting massive energy discharges. Something is emerging from the site. Something big. Stone immediately moved to the communication console. Commander Sullivan, this is Guardian Unit 7. Report the status of the containment vessel. Guardian Unit 7, Sullivan replied. The vessel is intact, but there's no life sign from the Guardian inside. The stasis chamber appears to have failed years ago. Whatever he was guarding is now free. Stone's face went pale. Commander, evacuate your station immediately and set course for minimum safe distance. Do not attempt to engage or investigate the energy source. Understood, Guardian Unit 7, Sullivan replied. But you should know that we're detecting similar energy signatures from several other locations throughout the galaxy. Whatever was contained at the Guardian sites is waking up. Stone turned away from the communication console and faced President Carter. Madam President, the choice is no longer whether to activate the protocols. The ancient threats are returning whether we are prepared or not. The question now is whether humanity will face these threats as the peaceful species you have chosen to be, or as the Guardians you were always meant to become. Admiral Rogers stood up and walked to the window overlooking Earth's capital city. Millions of people went about their daily lives completely unaware that their entire species stood at. The first Guardian site to fail completely was located in the Vegan system on the outer rim of the galaxy. Captain Kate Sullivan and her crew aboard the UES Defiant watched from what they thought was a safe distance as containment field generators that had operated flawlessly for 50,000 years finally gave up their long vigil. What emerged from the collapsed containment field was something that had once been human but was no longer recognizable as such. The entity moved through space without any protection from the vacuum and seemed to absorb energy directly from the nearby star. When it spoke, its voice carried across space in ways that violated every known law of physics. I remember you, the entity said, as it turned its attention toward the Defiant. You carry the scent of the home world, the scent of those who chose to forget what they were. Captain Sullivan tried to maintain communications with Earth, but found that her transmissions were being absorbed by the entity before they could reach their destination. The creature was somehow feeding on the ship's energy emissions and growing larger with each passing moment. You were supposed to remain sleeping, Sullivan said over her ship's external communication system. The war is over. The galaxy is at peace. The entity that had once been Guardian Unit 8 laughed, and the sound made every human on the ship feel cold despite their environmental suits. Peace, it said. You call this peace. You have forgotten what we sacrificed to achieve this precious piece of yours. You have forgotten the price we paid. Back on Earth, Commander Stone was working frantically with Dr. Amy Foster and her team to access the control systems of the Antarctic facility. The ancient computers were responding to his genetic signature, but many of the systems had degraded over 50,000 years of dormancy. I need access to the Guardian communication network, Stone said as he worked at a console that looked nothing like current human technology. If I can reach the other Guardians before they fully awaken, I might be able to prevent a complete cascade failure. Dr. Foster watched the displays showing energy readings from around the galaxy. Stone, we're detecting massive power buildups at 7 different Guardian sites now. Whatever was contained there is drawing energy from local star systems. Stone's expression grew grim as he reviewed the data. Those aren't just weapons or defense systems. The Guardian ships were also containing entities that became too dangerous even for the war effort. Humans who had been transformed so completely that they could no longer be considered part of our species. What do you mean? Dr. Foster asked. During the war against the Devourers, some humans volunteered for experimental modifications that went beyond what was considered safe, Stone explained. They became beings capable of consuming matter at the atomic level to fuel their own growth and power. When the war ended, these entities were deemed too dangerous to be allowed freedom in the galaxy. President Helen Carter's voice came through, the communication system from the war room above them. Stone, we're receiving reports from human colonies throughout the galaxy. People are experiencing strange dreams and visions. Medical facilities are reporting cases of spontaneous genetic activation. Stone stopped working and looked up with an expression of deep concern. The awakening entities are broadcasting on frequencies that interact directly with human DNA. They're trying to trigger the activation protocols in the general population. Dr. Foster checked her readings. Is that possible? Not only possible, but inevitable, Stone replied. Every human carries the genetic modifications necessary for transformation. The psychological conditioning that has kept those modifications suppressed for 50,000 years is breaking down under the influence of the Guardian broadcasts. In the Vegan system, Captain Sullivan was discovering just how dangerous the awakened entities could be. Her ship's shields were failing as the creature continued to drain energy from every system on the vessel. When she ordered her crew to prepare for evacuation, she found that the entity was somehow interfering with their escape pods. You cannot run from what you are, the entity told them. You cannot hide from your true nature forever. The galaxy made us into monsters, and now it will pay the price for our transformation. The creature reached out with appendages that seemed to be made of controlled energy and began tearing through the Defiant's hull like it was paper. But instead of destroying the ship, it began converting the metal and ceramic components into some kind of organic material that pulsed with its own inner light. We are hungry, the entity said. We have been hungry for 50,000 years. The galaxy owes us a debt, and we intend to collect. Meanwhile, in another part of the galaxy, the Hegemony Council was meeting an emergency session aboard their flagship, the Eternal Dominion. Representatives from all 5 founding species had gathered to discuss the crisis, but their usual diplomatic protocols had been abandoned in favor of barely controlled panic. Ambassador Zix of the Vorthon Empire stood before a holographic display showing the positions of the awakening Guardian sites. The energy signatures we are detecting exceed anything in our databases. These entities appear to be drawing power directly from stellar cores. Fleet Admiral Korath of the Centauri Federation slammed one of his 4 arms on the conference table. I warned the Council years ago that allowing humans to integrate with galactic civilization was a mistake. The historical records clearly indicate that their species was responsible for ending the Devourer War through methods that were considered genocidal even by the standards of that conflict. The question now, said Elder Min of the Ethereal Collective, is whether we attempt to contain these awakening entities or evacuate our populations to the outer rim and hope the humans can control their own monsters. High Counselor Voss of the Hegemony looked around the table at his fellow leaders. Our combined fleets are powerful, but the readings we are getting from the Guardian sites suggest that conventional weapons will be ineffective against these entities. We may be facing opponents who are immune to the kind of warfare that has defined galactic conflict for the past 50,000 years. Back on Earth, Admiral Ben Rogers was coordinating humanity's response to the crisis. Reports were coming in from colonies throughout human space indicating that the genetic activation process was beginning to affect the civilian population. People were exhibiting enhanced physical abilities and seemed to require less food and water than normal humans. We're also receiving reports of spontaneous space adaptation, Rogers told President Carter. Some individuals appear to be developing the ability to survive in vacuum environments for short periods. Others are exhibiting increased radiation resistance. President Carter reviewed the medical reports with growing concern. How long before the transformation becomes irreversible? According to Stone's projections, we have perhaps 24 hours before the changes become permanent, Rogers replied. After that point, every human in the galaxy will be fundamentally different from what they are now. In the Antarctic facility, Stone had finally managed to establish communication with 2 of the remaining Guardian sites. The news he received was not encouraging. Guardian Unit 2 had awakened but remained stable and was attempting to contain the entity that had been released from his site. Guardian Unit 5 was experiencing system failures and predicted containment loss within hours. Guardian Unit 2, report your status, Stone said into the communication system. The voice that replied sounded tired and infinitely sad. Guardian Unit 7, this is Unit 2. I have successfully contained the entity designated Omega-7, but my power reserves are failing. The creature has been feeding on stellar radiation for the past 6 hours and has grown beyond the parameters of our original containment protocols. What is your assessment of the situation? Stone asked. The entities we contained were never meant to be imprisoned forever, Unit 2 replied. They were meant to be weapons in a war that would eventually end with their destruction or transformation into something less dangerous. We chose to preserve them instead of allowing them to evolve or die naturally. Stone felt a chill as he understood the implications. Unit 2, are you saying that the contained entities have been growing more powerful during their imprisonment? Affirmative, Unit 7, came the reply. They have been feeding on the energy of their containment systems for 50,000 years. They are no longer the same beings we imprisoned. They are something new and far more dangerous. The communication system suddenly activated with an emergency broadcast from Captain Sullivan in the Vegan system. Her voice was different now, stronger, and somehow more resonant. Earth Control, this is Captain Sullivan aboard the converted vessel Defiant. Be advised that Guardian Unit 8 has successfully integrated with our ship and crew. We are no longer entirely human, but we are also no longer threatened by the vacuum of space or the radiation from nearby stars. Stone immediately responded. Captain Sullivan, report your status and the status of your crew. We are alive, Guardian Unit 7, Sullivan replied. But we are also something more than... The vote took place across human space in a matter of hours. Every colony world, every space station, every research facility, and every ship in the human fleet was connected by quantum communication links that had been installed 50,000 years ago for exactly this purpose. President Helen Carter watched as the results came in from across the galaxy. New Geneva Colony voted yes with 97% approval. The Mars terraforming stations voted yes unanimously. The deep space exploration fleets voted yes. One by one, every human settlement in the galaxy made the same choice. They chose transformation over remaining unchanged in a galaxy that was rapidly becoming something beyond their understanding. The final vote came from the research station orbiting Proxima Centauri. Dr. Lisa Hamilton cast the deciding ballot from aboard the UES Wanderer, where she had been monitoring the situation with Captain Jake Morrison. When the results were tallied, the decision was unanimous. Humanity had chosen to activate the Guardian Protocol. Commander Alex Stone stood in the control center of the Antarctic facility, with his hand hovering over the activation switch. 50,000 years of careful planning and patient waiting had led to this moment. The choice that humanity's ancestors had made to forget their true nature was about to be reversed forever. Are you certain this is what your species wants? Stone asked President Carter through the communication link. We're certain, Carter replied. The alternative is to remain helpless while forces beyond our control reshape the galaxy. At least this way we retain some measure of choice in what we become. Stone pressed the activation switch and felt the weight of 50 millennia lift from his shoulders. Throughout human space, ancient transmitters that had been hidden beneath Cities and inside space stations began broadcasting a signal that had been designed to unlock the deepest secrets of human DNA. The transformation began slowly at first. People reported feeling more energetic and alert. Their physical abilities began to improve, and their need for food and sleep decreased. But as the hours passed, the changes became more dramatic. Humans began developing the ability to survive in vacuum for extended periods. They could process radiation and other forms of energy directly into their bodies. Captain Morrison stood on the bridge of the Wanderer and watched as his crew underwent the transformation. Dr. Hamilton was the first to adapt completely. She removed her environmental suit and stepped into an airlock that opened directly to space. Instead of dying, she simply floated there, breathing something that was not air and drawing energy from the nearby star. "Jake," she said through a communication method that did not rely on radio waves. "You need to see this. I can perceive things that were invisible before. Energy patterns that connect everything in the galaxy. It's beautiful." Morrison felt the changes beginning in his own body, but he was not afraid. The transformation felt natural, like waking up from a dream that had lasted his entire life. When he finally removed his own environmental protection and stepped into space, he understood what Dr. Hamilton had meant. He could see the flow of energy between stars and the connections that linked every living thing in the galaxy. More importantly, he could sense the other humans who were undergoing the same transformation throughout human space. They were becoming something new while still remaining essentially human. On Earth, President Carter experienced the transformation while standing in the war room surrounded by her advisors. When the change was complete, she found that she could perceive the thoughts and emotions of every human on the planet, not as an invasion of privacy, but as a natural expansion of her awareness. "Admiral Rogers," she said, "contact the alien fleets that are surrounding our colonies. I think it's time we had a conversation about humanity's role in the galaxy." The response from the Hegemony Council came within hours. Ambassador Zix appeared on the main screen of the war room, but his expression was different now. Instead of fear, there was something that looked almost like respect in his alien features. "President Carter," Zix said, "our sensors indicate that your species has undergone some kind of fundamental transformation. Are you still human?" "We are still human, Ambassador," Carter replied. "But we are also something more than we were before. We are what humanity was always meant to become when the pretense was no longer necessary." "The pretense?" Zix asked. Carter smiled, and for a moment Zix could swear he saw starlight reflected in her eyes. "The pretense that we were just another peaceful species trying to make our way in the galaxy. That pretense is no longer required." In the Vegan system, Captain Sullivan and her transformed crew had successfully established communication with the entity that had once been Guardian Unit 8. What they discovered was that the awakened Guardians were not monsters or weapons of destruction. They were simply humans who had evolved beyond the need for physical bodies and technological devices. "We are not your enemies," the entity explained to Sullivan. "We are what you will become given enough time and experience. The transformation your species is undergoing now is just the first step in a journey that will take you beyond anything you can currently imagine." Sullivan looked around at her crew, who were now capable of existing in the vacuum of space and manipulating matter at the molecular level with their thoughts. "What is the final destination of this journey?" "Freedom," the entity replied. "Freedom from the limitations of biology and technology. Freedom from the need for planets or ships or any of the physical constraints that define existence for other species. Your species will become the guardians of the galaxy, not through force or domination, but through the simple fact that nothing will be able to threaten you or those you choose to protect." Back on Earth, Commander Stone was experiencing his own transformation. The psychological conditioning that had kept him stable for 50,000 years was dissolving and being replaced by something far more complex. He could feel the presence of every other transformed human in the galaxy, and beyond that, the awakening consciousness of humanity as a collective entity. Dr. Amy Foster, who had chosen to undergo the transformation while remaining in the Antarctic facility, approached Stone with wonder in her eyes. "Stone, I can sense the awakened guardians throughout the galaxy. They're not hostile. They're waiting for something." "They're waiting for us to join them," Stone replied. The Guardian Project was never meant to be permanent imprisonment. It was meant to be a holding pattern until humanity was ready to reclaim its heritage without losing its essential nature. And are we ready? Foster asked. Stone looked around the ancient facility that had preserved the secrets of human civilization for 50,000 years. Soon it would no longer be needed. The transformed humans would carry all of this knowledge within themselves and would be capable of creating new knowledge and new possibilities that the ancient humans could never have imagined. Yes, he said simply. We are ready. The transformation of humanity was completed within 72 hours of the activation of the Guardian Protocol. When it was finished, the galaxy found itself sharing space with a species that could travel between stars without ships, survive in any environment, and manipulate matter and energy through methods that seemed indistinguishable from magic. But, rather than becoming conquerors or destroyers, the transformed humans became protectors. They took responsibility for maintaining the stability of star systems and protecting younger species from threats that they were not equipped to handle. The galaxy that had once feared humanity's awakening discovered that their fears had been misplaced. The other species learned to coexist with their new neighbors, much as they had before the transformation. The difference was that now everyone understood the true balance of power in the galaxy. Humanity had chosen to be peaceful for 50,000 years, not because they were weak, but because they were strong enough to afford patience. Commander Stone, now calling himself simply Alex, established a new kind of Guardian network throughout the galaxy. These Guardians were not isolated watchers maintaining lonely vigils, but connected beings who worked together to ensure that the mistakes of the ancient war would never be repeated. Captain Morrison and Dr. Hamilton continued their exploration of the galaxy, but now they could visit places that had been impossible to reach before. They discovered that the universe was far larger and more complex than anyone had imagined, and that humanity's transformation was just one step in a cosmic evolution that included countless other species and possibilities. President Carter remained on Earth, but her awareness now extended throughout human space and beyond. She could sense the health and happiness of every human in the galaxy, while also maintaining diplomatic relationships with alien species who were slowly coming to terms with the new reality. The galaxy had learned to fear the darkness between stars during the ancient war against the Devourers. Now it had protectors who could travel through that darkness without fear and ensure that the light of civilization would never be extinguished again. Humanity had awakened from its long dream of being merely human, and the galaxy would never be the same. But for the first time in 50,000 years, the future held promise instead of fear, and the stars themselves seemed brighter, knowing that the Guardians were watching over them all.